guys, gals, non-binary pals, the tragedy of a substituted item from an online shopping order here with rhyme signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of wondering what kind of monster thinks that oatmeal and raisin cookies are in any way, shape or form an acceptable replacement for triple chocolate. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new Aeons album, The Ghosts of What We Knew. Growing up in the 1990s as a young Englishman, it was hard to avoid certain things on the old telly box, and one of those particulars was an irreverent sketch comedy called The Fast Show. It was quirky, nonsensical, bizarre, and featured countless catchphrases that formed part of the lexicon of myself and countless other older millennials. Now, far be it from me to understand precisely what it was that the writers of The Fast Show happened to have against the Isle of Man, but it was a consistent butt of numerous jokes, and when you're a young and impressionable lad, you end up forming an opinion of the place without ever having been there. Fortunately, I have since visited the land of tailless cats, motorbike races, and Triskelion iconography, and I can confirm it's actually quite a lovely place, with some of the friendliest people I've ever had the fortune of meeting, and having one of the cleanest capital cities I've actually ever been to. But now, amongst the island's various achievements and across its storied history, we can add one of the most exciting and promising young progressive metalcore bands in the world to its roster of accomplishments. Yes, everybody, Aeons are here with their third studio album, and I think they're about to blow up big time with this one. Open up your eyes, there will be blood. So, who are Aeons? These guys put out their first album back in 2019 called A Tragic End, and followed that up a couple of years later in 2021 with their sophomore release of Consequences. Now, I can actively remember listening to both of these albums when they first came out, as I recall there being a decent little bit of buzz going on about them. Now, I thought they were fine records, I'll be honest, there was nothing that really stuck out from them for me, but there was certainly enough for them to remain on my keep an eye on these guys list. And it really feels now that with their third album, The Ghosts of What We Knew, they've found their sound. They've found their stride and their groove. And what we're seeing here is the sharp upward spike of a band who now need to be paid full attention to. This is the kind of evolution of sound and design that I wish more bands would aspire to. This feels like the kind of glow-up we've not seen since Between the Buried and Me segued from Alaska into Colours. Aeons have demonstrated on this new record that they are coming for the world, and frankly, if they can keep this momentum going, these bold boys from the Isle of Man could very well be seen as one of the great steps forward in modern progressive metal. I've been having an absurd amount of fun with this album, and I'm super excited to share my thoughts about this one with you all, and precisely why I feel this is one of the best albums of 2024 so far. Okay, let's be real here for a second. This kind of music, as you well know, is absolutely my kind of jam. This heavy, guitar-driven set of 9 songs has come out swinging at me and left a huge, dirty, fist-shaped mark on my chest. There's a significant level of brutality and violence to the overall attitudes and moods to be heard. Opening track Noose wastes very little time in establishing the band's message. Once we move past the gentle acoustics of the intro, we're assaulted by one of the crunchiest, gnarliest, and crab-walking in the mosh pit riffs I've heard all year. It's a punishingly powerful way to open up the album, but Aeons aren't afraid to, pull it back a little bit when needed and allow softer, more introspective and atmospheric moments to take the lead, making for a record that feels varied and experimental, but still keeps its focus on its style and groove. Lead vocalist Skippy Hilton has an impressive range and exceptional delivery to every line he belts out. Skirting the line between Periphery-esque barks and growls and Corey Taylor-sounding cleans, he comes across as fluent, confident, and firmly in control of the ship. There's not a single moment of him being behind the microphone that feels wasted. The balance between aggression and introspection is honestly marvellous, showcasing a fantastic trade-off between style and flair. Skippy is one of those rare vocalists whose work can set me off with goosebumps up and down my arms with very little effort, and his delivery on this record is nothing short of astonishing. But let's be real, this kind of music lives and dies by its instrumentation more than anything, and the twin attack guitars of Scott Sayer and Cy Harvey have got my blood pumping in ways that only the likes of, Paul Wagner and Dusty Waring, or Charlie Griffiths and Richard Henshaw have ever managed before. There's a sense of, urgency, of primal savagery to the riffing, and it feels like a band that's been scrapping for decades now, learning their place within the landscape of the progressive metal world to bring us a kind of tonality and delivery that feels familiar but fresh. Now, there's a lot of comparisons to be made to bands like Periphery, like Opeth, like Nea Obliviscaris, etc., etc. But at the same time, these guys are making their own personal branding on what is otherwise familiar territory. But let's not forget the rhythm section of Joe Holland on bass and Justin Wallace on drums. These guys have managed to lock in perfectly with some of the craziest grooves and creative fills I've heard in progressive metal this year. Ironically though, on one of the lightest tracks, Blood, is where Wallace really demonstrated to me just how intricate his work on the skins is. Delicate and complex patterns show off that it's not just blast beats and hyper-aggression leading the charge here. Aeons show off a softer side on this track, making for a fantastic breaking point after the relentless assault of the first two tracks. Now, we can't talk about the best parts of the album without mentioning the 19-minute long epic track of Ghosts. It is safe to say that if I do a Best Epics of the Year video in December, that this is going to be a real contender for the top spot. Imagine taking all the best parts of the djent movement, the grooves, the power, the energy and the passion, and flexing it with some of the most complex compositions and creative musicality that is so often associated with progressive metal to make a perfect blend of the two. Ghosts is a triumph of fusion with some of the most expressive guitar solos I've heard in quite some time. I've been listening to this track in isolation of the rest of the album quite a lot now, and I'm getting to that point where the 19 minutes, they frankly just fly by at 200 miles an hour, such is my affinity and familiarity with it. It is a smorgasbord of absolutely unbelievable moments and stands tall as the band's true magnum opus. But, of course, nothing is perfect, and I have a couple of little nitpicks to make with the album as a whole. Now, while I wouldn't call any of the songs on the Ghosts of What We Knew as unnecessary, following the conclusion of the 19-minute epic, we still have two tracks to close things out. The 5-minute long Machines and the 10-minute long Collapse. These are good songs, yes. In fact, I would possibly call Collapse one of the best songs on the album. But after the relentless face-pounding we've just been given by Ghosts, they almost feel like filler, taking the record from what would have been a tidy 50 minutes or so to a kind of slightly bloated 66 minutes. It almost feels like these are, bonus tracks on what would have otherwise been a special edition of the record, extras for the hardcore fan or whatever. As frankly, after the astonishing climax of Ghosts, I'm usually ready to call it a day. There's something to be said for knowing when to stop and call it quits, and these extra two tracks on the end do feel superfluous to the point. A record doesn't need to be long for long's sake, and I do feel that Aeons have fallen into this trap somewhat. Some of these shorter tracks also don't quite do it for me. Cascade is a perfectly fine ballad, feeling a little bit like Damnation-era Opeth or later Catatonia, but it lacks any kind of particular emotional weight or punch, feeling more like a speed bump in the album rather than a necessary pause in the action before we jump right back into the brutality that capstones most of the record. Honestly though, I'm just kind of picking hairs at this point. By and large, the Ghosts of What We Knew is a triumphant experience, managing to feel like a perfect stepping up point for Aeons. A true culmination of everything they've learned from their first two records to make for a punishingly efficient display of their powers and abilities as musicians. So, what else can I say about Aeons, the Ghosts of What We Knew? I have been looking for this kind of album all year, quite frankly. A vicious display of musicianship and technicality, whipped up perfectly with restraint and flair to make for an album that's complex and intimidating on first listen, but becomes more and more accessible with every subsequent spin. From the superb vocal performances, the eclectic guitar work and tasteful fusion of both light and shadow across its admittedly bloated runtime, Aeons have crafted the best album of their career thus far. This is a perfect jumping in point for the band as well, and there's a lot to love on this record. Anyone who appreciates guitar-focused progressive metal and has become burnt out on forced quirkiness just for the sake of it will have an absolute blast with this technical masterstroke of an album. I've got my physical copy on order, guys, and I would thoroughly recommend that you do the same. Aeons have really hit the nail on the head with this one, and I'm expecting another step up from the band whenever album number 4 comes out. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion, so if you have listened to this one, if you've loved it, if you've hated it, whatever you felt about it, please talk to me about your experiences with the album in the comments down below. Please do drop me a thumbs up if you like the video, guys. Please do tell your friends about me, and please do consider subscribing to the channel if you've been enjoying my particular brand of music criticism. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.